What if I told you the ending of You Season 5 could have been one of the most satisfying conclusions to a Netflix series? But instead, it left fans divided and disappointed. After 2 long years of anticipation, viewers were finally met with the finale of You. But rather than ending on a high, the show stumbled, delivering its lowest-rated episode to date. For a story that gripped audiences with psychological intrigue and a chilling anti-hero, this felt like a missed opportunity. Like many series, it faced the ultimate test, how to end in a way that justifies the journey. And much like the Umbrella Academy, You deserved better. If I had the chance to rewrite the ending, Joe Goldberg's fate would have been drastically different. For starters, Joe wouldn't have been killed off. It's simply too easy of an escape for someone who's murdered over 20 people. No. His punishment needed to be more fitting, more permanent. A prison sentence. The real misstep, in my view, came when Joe reintroduced Louise into his life. While the writers positioned it as a twisted love dynamic, it felt out of character. Joe is cunning and calculated. He wouldn't bring her back for love. He'd bring her back for revenge. That line Joe delivers at the end of episode 7, "We're not done with each other yet," would have sparked his pursuit. He would have tracked Louise down, captured her, and placed her back inside the very cage she once knew as a callback to episode 2. Her earlier comments about the cage exposing people, making them vulnerable, would now be more than foreshadowing. It would become a central tool in the final confrontation. While Joe would be taunting her with the keys placed just within view, he'd spiral emotionally. Louise would use his weakness against him, his tendency to unravel when faced with betrayal. In these tense scenes, Joe would yet again fall into the patterns that have always driven him. Abandonment issues rooted in his relationship with his mother, and a self-justified belief that his murders are acts of righteousness. Meanwhile, Kate would be working to free Nadia from prison. Together, they'd plot to take Joe down, debating whether to end his life or find a way to stop him legally. As they reach Mooney's bookstore, they'd discover Joe already inside. And just like in the show, Kate would knock him out cold. With the key already in the compartment, they'd free Louise, and together with Nadia, lock Joe in his own cage. It's here that Joe would confront Nadia, now free and filled with rage, ready to end him then and there. But Kate would hold her back, insisting justice needed to be served properly. Kate and Joe would then have a final, weighty conversation, one laced with moral conflict. Kate would acknowledge her own wrongs and express willingness to face consequences, presenting a stark contrast to Joe's self-righteousness. She'd even bring up Henry, Joe's son, revealing that he would one day grow to loathe his father once the truth came out. Joe, who always prided himself on being better than his own father, would come to the harsh realization that he'd become the very thing he feared. Just like in the original, Kate would be secretly recording their exchange. Joe would confess his crimes, but this time the tension would be even higher. When Kate leaves to check on the others, Joe would remove the hidden key from inside his arm, escape the cage, and brutally kill Kate, his final victim. Despite her remorse, Kate was never going to jail, and her death would feel like a grim sort of poetic justice in Joe's twisted world. At the same time, Mooney's bookstore would be set ablaze by Maddie echoing the original ending. The flames would consume the place where Joe's madness was born, his sanctuary, his prison, and the home of his literary fantasies. As he tried to flee the fire, the authorities would finally arrive. Joe would be arrested, Kate's body discovered, and the recording of his confession would seal his fate. Louise and Nadia would be recognized as the survivors who finally brought Joe down, but the finale wouldn't dwell too long on them. Instead, the spotlight would shift to a long-overdue moment, Joe Goldberg's trial. This would show a version of Joe stripped of charm and delusion, his soul laid bare. Emotional and broken, he'd appear as a shell of his former self, exposed to the world as the cold, manipulative killer he truly is. During these scenes, we'd go deep into his past, especially his unresolved trauma with his mother. Through the investigation, it would be revealed that his mother had died. This news would break Joe internally. The woman he had killed for, protected, and whose absence shaped his identity, would now be gone forever. Her storyline would close with impact, not through a reunion, but through absence. Throughout the trial, various characters from past seasons would be brought into the spotlight. Love's own murders would be revealed, paving the way for characters like Sherry, Carrie, and Dottie to make their appearances. The crimes of the past would unravel, and Joe, cornered by the mounting evidence, would start to confess. He'd admit to what happened to Delilah, Candace, and perhaps even acknowledge Love as the only person who truly matched his darkness. We might not see Ellie in person, but a letter or an Easter egg would hint at her awareness and survival. Ultimately, Joe would be sentenced to life in prison without parole. The final scene would cut to him in his cell, void of life, haunted, and trapped in silence. Gone is the charisma, the facade, the romanticized predator. What remains is a man tormented by the ghosts of his past, abandoned by everyone, especially the son he once cherished. Henry wouldn't be following in his father's footsteps. He'd be living with Teddy, surrounded by people who would protect him from the darkness Joe once lived in. And with that, Joe Goldberg would finally face the one fate he could never escape: complete and utter solitude. No redemption, no escape. Just a man left alone with nothing but his thoughts and the realization that he had become everything he once despised.